Yeah, people have been kind of reaching out and, trying to maintain a sense of support um, for lots of people, really, not just students. Actually, most of the students seem to be doing very well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm doing good. Thank you. So
Yeah.
I'll begin with an introduction. Welcome to the Gentle Art Podcast with Gene Dunn. Today we have
Thank you very much.
Friend on. Say again.
Go ahead.
I
thought you were welcoming me. I was excited. I'm excited to be here. So I thought you were welcoming me. I didn't realize you're welcoming everybody else.
Well, let me get there, buddy. Let me get there. Jeez. So welcome, everybody. And today we have my best friend on, Brian Glick. And Brian, welcome to the Gentle Art.
Thank you.
I see your timing is impeccable. You remain in practice.
Yeah, that's right. Working on it.
Very good. So just so everybody knows, all is well over there and healthy family, everybody good?
Everybody's doing great. Yeah, we're doing great.
Very good. So I kind of just wanted to go through your martial art journey a little bit and kind of explore what that is and see what comes up in the conversation. So you and I met in, I think, 2001 or 2000. When did we meet?
Yeah, 2000. That was towards the end of the year, I think.
So you came to the Renzo Gracie Academy in 2000. That means that you're celebrating your 20th year.
Yeah. Second half of this year will be year number 20. We got to get there, and then we'll celebrate.
Oh my gosh, very good. I had this interesting conversation with Danaher one time, and I said that it's my observation that martial artists, once they pass the 20-year mark, go absolutely mad.
Right. If they haven't gone mad before then they really go nuts. Yeah.
Yeah. Him and I laugh about it, and he I remember when I first proposed this, I think him and I were probably at, year 15 or something like that. And he had said, like, what do you think it is? And I said, it's the breathing. It's all of this erratic breathing that makes everybody go crazy.
Yeah, that's right. Like the opposite of pranayama. People going. Yeah.
I wish I had a funny comeback to pranayama, like nutty yama. Yeah. So you came to jiu-jitsu. I can remember it pretty clearly. You were in your early 20s, and like, how did you get to the Renzo Gracie Academy? I don't mean like, you walked, right?
Yeah,
you lived down the
I walked. Yeah, it was by chance. It was kind of by chance, because I had the good fortune of running into a guy who was really a lifelong martial artist. He was a guy named Andy Pollock, and he had grown up in California. So he had done karate for a long time. He had done Muay Thai for a long time, and his karate instructor was Demura. So he was very into a traditional kind of martial arts approach, and so we met, and that was at a time where I wasn't really doing very much physical activity. I was just kind of hanging around. I was in my 20s. I was just into some other things. I was never really an active, like super active person. So I wasn't really doing much. I had like kind of an active lifestyle, because I was, running around all over the place. And, it was, again, when you're in your 20s in New York, you're always moving around, and, but not really anything consistent, and certainly nothing for fitness. And so he came along, and he had said, we had gotten talking about some of the things that we did. At the time, I was really into music. We talked about that. And he said, oh, you know, I do martial arts. You know, he had a regular kind of day job, but he was really into training. And I asked him about that. I was always interested a little bit, you know, in that sort of thing. So I asked him about it, and he said that he was really into this thing called grappling, and that he had done traditional martial arts. You know, he had done karate and he had done all of these other things, but the grappling was the thing that he was really into. And he said, you know, there's this group of guys, family, who were, you know, really into it. They were really great at it, and they had all these challenge matches. And, you know, did I want to see what it looked like? And I said, yeah, sure, you know. And, you know, well, the thing about grappling is, you know, it takes place on the ground. And I remember, I'm sure I've told you this, but I remember thinking to myself, like, what kind of idiot fights on the ground? You know, everybody knows what fighting looks like. It looks like, you know, two guys squaring up and trying to knock each other's blocks off. So, you know, what are we talking about? And he did something. He said, oh, I'm going to show it to you. And he must have showed me a try. He put me in the triangle. He put me in the guillotine. He put me in something. And I just remember, you know, he didn't say anything about tapping. He didn't say anything about what was supposed to happen. He didn't say anything about any of that stuff. So he put me in something or other. And it was like my eyes were popping out of my head before he stopped, you know, doing whatever he was doing. And, you know, that's an impressive way to figure out, you know, that this stuff is effective. So I said, you know, that's, you know, cool. Tell me more.
Thanks for intro lesson 1.
Yeah.
Brian, was there something about him that was impressive or inspiring that kind of bridged it for you? Or was it the move that he demonstrated on you? Or was it like, what was it? What was the thing that you were like, oh, I really, like, I want to be like that, or I want to do that? What was it?
Yeah. Well, I think it was a combination of two things. The first was that he physically showed me this thing. And it was, you know, the way it is with what we do, it was like the equivalent of someone showing you how to box by knocking you out. You know, it was because it was so immediate. There wasn't really any theory. There wasn't anything I had to kind of figure out. It was this, you know, something pretty simple, and the result was immediate. And then, you know, afterwards I was fine. I wasn't, you know, I was getting up off the floor, but I wasn't getting up off the floor with like my face rearranged, you know? So to me, that was something that was very interesting, in the sense that, like, it showed me that it could be done, like I could do it and not have to, I mean, you know, like the barrier for entry wasn't high. It seemed very readily accessible. And honestly, I think that that's one of the reasons that, and you could tell me this, I guess I would ask you this, like when jiu-jitsu first came around, I would imagine that was one of the points of entry for a lot of people, was that it was kind of accessible, that the barrier for entry wasn't so great. And I mean, that's how I felt. That was one of the factors.
I have a question. I'd love to answer the question. My experience is a bit different, but did you realize that, like, because you were kind of unscathed, that was like some, like, an aspiration, like that you could, like, actually engage with this martial art and either not be hurt or not hurt anyone? Was that in the lexicon? Was that in your kind of thought process, or just it was like an added benefit, if you will?
Well, not really, because, you know, I didn't have a sense of what a practice looked like. You know, in that moment, I didn't know what a practice looked like. I didn't know if it meant that you drill on a passive partner. I didn't know if it meant that, you know, you're always working one-on-one with an instructor. I didn't have any context for it, you know, because I don't know, but I would guess that presently somebody going into jiu-jitsu or into the martial arts has a much wider perspective on what happens in a class because there's so much more information about it. But back then, there wasn't any information, and then there wasn't any real like way of getting to information about it. You know what it looked like, unless you knew someone who had already done it,
or you had the tapes. There were
you had the tapes. Well, so that was the second thing, because you know before he left, he was visiting New York, right? And when he left me with two
instructional tapes.
Well, he left me with 3 tapes. One of them was like UFC 1 or UFC 2.
Oh, wow.
One of them was one of the original Horion instructionals.
Yes.
And one of them was Gracie in action.
By the way, for those of you who don't know, when we say tapes, we mean VHS tapes. Some of you...
Yeah, these were VHS. Yeah.
Some of you might not know what VHS means.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, these were like, you know, bricks, these things. So
yeah. You could actually use them for self-defense.
Yeah.
Do you remember what was the most impressive one of those? For me, I remember watching UFC 1 and deciding there that I was going to do jiu-jitsu. It was just a matter of where and when. And then by UFC 2, after UFC 2, I had found Craig Kukuk and started lessons. But like, I remember Gracie in action being the thing that was like, I like had to watch over and over and over again, because I mean, we now know that like none of it was staged, I believe, but it was recorded at a time where nobody really knew, you know, like right. Listening to you, it seems like when you came in was kind of like the dark ages comparatively. But when I came in, like they hadn't even discovered fire yet, never mind like the wheel, you know what I mean? So was it in action, or was it UFC, or was it Hordeon's instructional that, and by the way, that guy did you a real favor, didn't he? Like
he did, yeah. He did. And yeah, and you know, amazingly, you know, we're still in touch a little bit. I mean,
nice.
You know, I was in when I went to the Netherlands last year, and it was an amazing moment. He showed up as a student in the seminar, and he had contacted me before about coming, and he's a very quiet, very kind of humble guy.
Martial art guy.
Really genuine, sweet person. So he, you know, when he showed up, I had a chance to thank him, and it was great. And I've had a chance to thank him before, but this was on a different level.
Yeah, that's a different context. When you have a chance to acknowledge someone that's like the reason for you doing your life's work, my goodness, so powerful. Is he still practicing martial arts?
He is. He's still very active, very actively training and working hard and progressing and doing great. And
does he?
I mean, and this is, you know, this is 20 years later. Does
he have a concept of like who you are in jiu-jitsu now? Is he able to kind of grasp that, or is it just?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll put it like this. You know, sometimes I think you can probably speak to this, you know, but sometimes when you've been practicing for a while and you come across someone who is your senior in terms of time and knew you know, back when, it can be difficult for them to bridge the gap between the past and the present and to properly contextualize what's going on in the moment. And, you know, he doesn't have that problem. You know, he was very, you know, I mean, he met me where I am now rather than where we were before. And for a lot of people, I think that's difficult. I don't know why necessarily. I think some of it is confidence issue, or it's like a needing to compensate for something. But there's none of that there. And that's why I said, you know, he's a very, like, when it comes to being very humble and very genuine, that's just how he is. You know, there's nothing there to get in the way.
He's a martial art. He sounds, I never met him, right? We never met, but he sounds like a real martial arts guy, tried and true. You know, one of the things is my pet peeve, and you know this, like, I really don't like when people say, oh, I remember you when you were just like, you know, it'd be like me telling Gordon Ryan, like that's ridiculous, man. The guy is like incredible. Like, I mean, it's an important martial art skill in its own right to recognize, you know, people where they are, not where they used to be. It's a beautiful point. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So like, was it in action? Was it UFC? Was it construction?
So I think the light bulb turned on for me in UFC 1, where, and again, you know, I think it's a much different context now for people, even someone who has never seen jiu-jitsu before. There's just a general consciousness about what this thing looks like and how it moves and how people interact in this way, you know, physically interact in this way, because you only need to have seen a 5-second clip of a UFC fight to know what a clinch looks like, to know what it looks like to be in someone's guard. You know, that stuff is out there. It's on TV commercials and all of it, but there was no context really for it. So what I saw was when Royce Gracie fought Jason DeLucia. I don't know if you remember that, but it ends in a straight arm lock. Yeah, it ends in a straight arm lock.
It was the second time they fought. No, it was the second time they fought.
Yeah.
Or well, I think DeLuca fought Hoyler first, maybe. Go ahead.
Well, this was the way that the fight went, like the arc of the fight was, you know, they began standing, Royce ended up on his back, DeLucia was on top, and all of a sudden it seemed, you know, the way my brain was connected at the time, there was like what was happening, which was Royce was on his back, and it looked like he was on the receiving end, you know, he was about to be on the receiving end of a bunch of punches and kicks, and it was not looking good. So there was all the drama and excitement around that. And then the next moment, he was, you know, he had the arm lock totally locked up, Juji Gatami totally locked up, and DeLucia was tapping and headed face down. Yeah, like headed face down into the mat. And there was no understanding between those 2 points for me. There was like there was nothing to bridge the gap in between the like Royce being in danger and Royce being the victor. No, there was nothing in there. So it was like going from being in a room that was totally dark to being in a room where there was light, but I couldn't understand what had happened. So that was the moment for me when I said, you know, there's something here that I really don't get. And it seemed to be the very thing that made the most difference. You know, like if you watch that fight from beginning to end, however long it is, there are a lot of things that happen. But then this thing, which was the most significant thing, I had no understanding of how the pieces were put together. And I said, that's, you know, I was coming into it having had this explanation from Andy about what was going on a little bit. So I knew that there was something there, but because I didn't know what it was, I was like, oh, now I need to find out a little bit more about what this was. So I remember that. But then after that, the thing that made the biggest difference, I think, was really Gracie in action. Because it was not on a stage, it was not in an octagon, it was unscripted, it was, you know, it was so chaotic. And yet out of this very chaotic moment where when you, and again, I'm not sure how people feel when they watch it, but when I watch that, it's like your adrenaline is pumping because you're watching a real fight. It's unclear, you know, how it's going to turn out. Now, of course, you know, we know Gracie's always going to win, but back then it was like, how is it going to go? You know, what's going to happen next? And so that was a thing where,
well, also, you also put yourself in that situation. Do you remember doing that?
yeah,
Like going like,
yeah.
oh, what would I do? You know, it's so
Right.
fantastic. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, and I think that's probably something, and, you know, it would be good. You can, you know, bring on someone who has no jiu-jitsu experience and ask them, you know, what it's like to watch it. But I bet it's probably the same. You know, you put yourself in that person's place. And
for me, it was both people. For me, I was, because I had karate, so I was like putting myself in. It was so fascinating.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, so that was kind of like the second piece of the puzzle.
For a 20-something, a young 20-year-old man, was that adrenaline something that also appealed to you, or you were looking to kind of like master that?
Yeah, not really. I mean, I've never been an adrenaline fueled person, you know, it's not been a thing for me. You know, it just hasn't been. I'm not wired that way, I don't think. But I did feel it while I was watching that. And it was it wasn't, the other thing is, it wasn't simply as an observer. I think this is your point. It's not just you're like an observer, like you're watching a horror movie. It's not the same thing. It's like you're putting yourself into a context that is relevant also to you, you know? And so there was an urgency, like surprisingly an urgency to it. So that was something that was also very important because there seemed to be a method to the madness.
Yeah. When you came into jiu-jitsu, I heard that you said you had no context for a practice, but did you know that, like, did you come in going like, I'm going to take a few lessons and see how it goes, or I want to be a black belt or black belt, or when did it click for you? Let me give you a context. You know, my brother brought me to the dojo when I was 12. And I remember watching a couple of guys. There were 4 guys or 5 guys, no women. And it was a bunch of scientists in this backwoods kind of shed doing karate. And I remember thinking to myself, I want to be a black belt. I knew then. So when was it? When was that moment?
Well, you know, I think the first thing that I was looking for was a better understanding of what was going on in those chaotic moments. Like what was going on, and how was it that these guys, because they were guys, these guys could find their way through a tangled situation. Something, you know, it was kind of like if you found yourself in a forest and you had to, you know, find your way out of the forest, how would you do it? And it seemed like probably you wouldn't want to be in the forest to begin with, but if you were there, you would want to be able to navigate your way out. And these guys seem to have figured out a way to navigate their way out. And it wasn't simply by hacking their way out. You know, it wasn't like, it wasn't a machete they were using. It was something else. It was something else. And so the thing that was appealing to me was getting a better sense of what they knew about moving through this very complex environment. And remember also that there weren't many models of a black belt at the time. There were a few.
You mean
but
Jiu-Jitsu
really
Black
it was Jiu-Jitsu Black Belt.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was my context. You know, it wasn't really. I wasn't coming from a traditional martial arts background. You know.
Even I wasn't a Jiu-Jitsu Black Belt at that time, right? Like
you were not. You were a purple belt. Danaher was a purple belt. Matt Serra, I think, was a brown belt. Nick Serra was a brown belt. You know, really the only black belts, like, you know, Ricardo may have just gotten his black belt, maybe. I can't honestly, I can't remember. But so that was so far out. It wasn't an achievable goal. It wasn't meaningful because it was so.
There was no context, right?
No, it was so distant.
And you didn't have another. See, I had a karate black belt as like a model, so I like it was ingrained in me. But you didn't have. You did? Did you? You told me that you and your sister used to watch the June-Ri commercials. Did you take Taekwondo?
Right. No, and that was about as close as we came, really, to understanding, you know, to having any kind of martial arts experience.
For those of you who don't know, June-Ri was a pioneer in Taekwondo in this country, a really good man and a really solid guy, and is one of the reasons why, well, everybody who has a martial arts school in this country follows the June-Ri method of running a school, whether they know it or not. Just in the same way, like everybody owes Bruce Lee a debt of gratitude that's in the martial arts worldwide. The same is for June-Ri in terms of schools. You know, the students that benefit from a professional school and those, like, he was the guy. So he had a commercial in the 70s and 80s in DC, right? A television commercial. And you and I have talked about, like, it's infamous. It's really, and it was a unique thing in those days. And so to be like that close but that far all at the same time is fascinating. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, and you know, again, in jiu-jitsu at that time, there weren't that many models of black belt. There were models of were models of capacity and capability. There were models of people doing it, and the people who were doing it were doing it well, were so far away from the people who were just beginning doing it that alone was a motivator. It wasn't even that, you know, because there was also no gi going on, and no one was wearing belts, you know, for that. So there was a sense that the people who were able to manage the find their way through, that was what you were going for. That was what you were trying to be like. You know, that was where you were headed.
So am I hearing that, like, in those first days that you didn't make the decision to become a black belt per se, or even a lifetime martial artist? You were modeling the kind of standard of excellence that you saw, and that was like inspiring you to go further.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And also, you know, blue belt was a goal. So, and part of it was because that was something that was visible. There were people around who had gotten to blue belt. You know, no one around had gotten to black belt.
Not so
many, but more than black belt. So there were visual representations of what that looked like. And it seemed at the time something that was actually achievable instead of something that was floating out in the ether that, you know, very few people would even hope to dream would be possible. Which is how it was at black belt.
Who were one of the guys that you looked up to in those early days? Like, who was someone that you were like, wow, I want to do jiu-jitsu like that? Because I think now people are going, wow, I want to do jiu-jitsu like Brian Glick. Like,
Yeah.
who was the guy?
Well, I think there were two guys. There were a lot of people, and I think I'll forego the obvious ones, and I'll go into kind of the archives a little bit.
Deep cuts. You're gonna go into the deep
you'll remember.
cuts?
You'll remember. So there was a guy very early on. You'll remember. You remember Mike Padalino?
Of course. He's Matt Serra's guy right now. I talk to him sometimes.
Yes. Yeah.
Mike.
So Padalino at the time he was much more, in the martial arts context, we would call him the senpai.
Yeah.
Because he was a blue belt already. He had more experience than I did. He was working at a higher level, but still close enough to be able to help me up.
You could reach him, right? He was accessible.
Yeah, I could reach him. That's right. And so the other thing about him was that he was always a very
sweet guy.
He was a very nice guy who was happy to make a joke about, something and kind of lighten the atmosphere a little bit. And at that time, the atmosphere was very heavy a lot of the time. And it was intimidating. It's intimidating now, I think, for new people. But at the time, it was much more intimidating. There
was no beginner class, Brian.
Yeah. Not only was there no beginner class, there was no, it would be like, I don't know. It's like you're going down into a mine and there's no line out. You're not going down a rope. There's not some way of climbing back up. It was really very intensive. So he was there as, he'd stick his elbow in your ribs a little bit and, get you laughing when things were a little bit, intense. Yeah. So, and he was a very good partner. He was someone who would work with new people, and when I was a new person, he worked with me. He was very helpful, spent a little bit of extra time explaining things. And as everybody knows, a little goes a long way at the very beginning because you need that assistance. You need that guidance. And so he was very important. It's on like a Kohai level. Yeah.
It's so important, like people listening, if you're in the martial arts, like a little kindness goes a long way for a beginner. And in those days, like the mentality, if you came in, you were considered, in quotations, fresh meat. There was not like take care of the beginner mentality. No, it was like the beginner, it was hazing. The beginner had to prove himself. And if he didn't, or she didn't, good luck, take care, comb your hair. Right. It was really like that.
Yeah, and part of this, one of the things that he did very well was it was a warmness, but it wasn't a softness. The context again for the training was still,
you had to be tough.
Was still training. We were still going at it, but there was something that made it a little bit easier as a new person to be able to get through because and sometimes it's like this every single class you do. There are periods of time where it's like but you really have to get out past the break. I'm not a surfer, but if you're going out, there's a period where you have to go past the break, and then after that, it's not that there aren't any waves. There are still waves, but you don't have to fight your way. You don't have to resist the push back to the shore quite as strongly. And so you have people that help you get out past the break, and he was definitely one of those guys. Another guy who was similar, but another level up. Like, so Padalino was on like the first rung, The next rung was the McTighe brothers.
Oh yeah, Matt and Scott McTighe.
So,
super athletes, by the way.
Super athletes. I mean, just incredibly flexible and strong and agile and, athletic. They understood jiu-jitsu. They understood movement.
they were tough too. They fought. They were very tough guys. Yeah, they were
very
not
tough.
soft.
And thinkers, you know, they were really working their way through what was going on at the time, which was gi, which was no gi, which was the introduction of MMA.
Do you remember the New York Times article that came out, the first one on jiu-jitsu, and they had quoted a tattoo on Matt's back, "I think, therefore I am." You know, the reporter came in and said, you know, I guess he came into a no-gi class. So in those days, never mind a rash guard, you didn't have a shirt. You had a shirt and Speedos. It was like the beach, Brian. But like, I guess, you know, that he had that quote in Latin tattooed on his back, and that was kind of like the opening of the New York Times article. He was really a thinker. I love those guys. They're really amazing guys.
So those guys were much more models of where you could go to, you know, more aspirational, because there was a sense that they were putting the pieces together. They were working at a very high level. They were, you know, but at the same time, they were participants in the classroom setting too. They weren't apart from it.
They weren't,
you know, they weren't teachers. They were still students. So they were like the Kohai level, you know, Kohai 2.0. They were up, or sorry, Senpai 2.0. They were up the chain. And again, very open to questions, answering questions, sharing information, sharing what they were doing and what they were struggling with. And that was very meaningful to me at the time, because I remember thinking that these guys could be very standoffish, you know, if they chose to be, because they were that good. But they weren't. They were very willing to take on, you know, the assistant role to help a little bit. You know, and that was also very meaningful for me. Yeah.
They had a martial art background. They were, I don't know if you knew this, but they are George Cernak's Taekwondo students. He brought them to jiu-jitsu. He brought so many great people to jiu-jitsu. But yeah, they understood. They had a deep martial art background that provided them with a lot.
Yeah.
Is there one more, Brian? Like who exceeded even Senpai 2.0? Or did it go right up into the upper echelons, like Ricardo or Rodrigo?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, again, you, Danaher, Sean Williams, Ricardo, Matt, Nikki, all of, well, that was like a kind of God tier up here, you know, like everything else was below that. But yeah, Sean was very important for me.
He was a big thinker at the time.
Yeah, at the very beginning also. Yeah, and was again just a very, very talented instructor at the time, and willing to share, willing to you know, willing to spend some time with someone. You know, at the time, again, I didn't know anything. You know, I was like everybody else, didn't know anything. We were all figuring it out.
Yeah.
And so he was there to, again, patient, helpful, taking a lot of extra time to you know, spend with me, and I'm sure with a lot of other people at that time. And that was very meaningful. Yeah, that again, that's another lifelong relationship that is, you know, it's very present. It's still alive. So that was 20 years ago, you know, and we don't see each other as much as we,
yeah, but
you know, as much as I see,
those
you know, you or Danaher. Yeah.
If I saw
that was
it would still be the same. I have another question. What's like one very funny story from the old Renzo Gracie Academy and a very kind of like serious experience, or what you witnessed, like where you went like, oh wow?
I don't know. I don't know if I have any funny. I don't know if I have any funny memories. Yeah, I love
arm lock. I love arm lock memory. But what's like one story that stands out from like the 2000 to 2002 days?
Yeah. Okay, so I remember that. So this is not like a funny story, but it did have a lesson for me in it. That I think was good. At the time, and people now may not know, but at the time, Shembri was like the jiu-jitsu guy's jiu-jitsu guy.
Yeah.
He was doing things that nobody had seen before on people who were just the top of their class everywhere. And he was very, very flexible. He was very unorthodox in a lot of his approach to the guard. He just had a very unusual way of going about it, but it was so effective. He was submitting people all the time. He did very well in Abu Dhabi early on. And I remember that he came to, someone had said that Nino is going to be here, or someone had said, oh, Nino was here. And we were there during the daytimes, remember? So someone had said during like the daytime on a Monday, oh, Nino was here last night. And I was like, oh, maybe I'm going to be able to see him. So I think he was coming in when I was leaving. And I saw him in the locker room. And I thought to myself, this is great. I mean, this guy, because I had watched on like VHS tapes a lot of the, his fights in the, Mundials and, Brasileiros and all of these things. And I was like, oh, Nino Shembri, this is an amazing thing. And, we were in the, I might have been a blue belt. I mean, I was probably a blue belt. And so I saw him in the locker room and I was like, oh, what do I say? So I remember going up to him. I said, oh, it's nice to meet you. I love your jiu-jitsu. And I don't know what I thought he was going to say, but he looked at me and he went like this. I love Elvis.
Yeah, he loves Elvis.
And I thought to myself, and then after that, it was nothing. It was just like a blank stare. And he kept staring at me, and I was like, oh, okay. All right, nice to meet you. And so I put my stuff on. I left, and it was weird, right? He was a total Elvis freak, right? But
he was a bit anomalistic in like his thinking. He was not an average fellow. I mean, he came out in Pride wearing an Elvis costume. Like he walked to the ring dressed as Elvis. Yeah. Like the guy was thinking. Yeah. So it was the thing that gave him that beautiful jiu-jitsu and this other bizarre weirdness, right?
Yeah, well, it was so weird. And, after that, I thought to myself, this isn't a place for hero worship.
Yeah.
It was.
That's very good.
In the moment that it happened, I was like, you know what? Like, that's not what this thing calls for. And it was a moment where I had seen myself, I think, or seen like one of the positions you can be in. Are you there?
I am.
Seeing one of the positions you can be in as like being a fan, or being like like having a sense of hero worship for people who are doing these things that you are you admire.
And
but
aspire to, right?
And aspire to. But, you know, in the moment after that happened, I realized, you know, this isn't like hero worship is not an appropriate approach to take in this thing that we're doing. And I think that although it was totally bizarre, it was very surreal, you know, surreal. I think that what he was saying or doing in that moment was just like taking me out of this place where I was probably like, you know, I was a fan. I was like, I wanted something, or I wanted to like rub elbows with him, or I wanted to, you know, tell him how much I liked him so that I don't know what I wanted. But I think that he sensed some part of that and was like, that's not what this is. You know, I'm not gonna indulge that. Instead, I'm gonna, you know, this is what you know, great, thanks very much. Here's what I like. And
which was completely out of the context of jiu-jitsu. That's what
but it was,
impetus,
and I don't wanna make too much of it, but
I get the point.
I'll paint it a little bit. It's, you know, it was like the Zen master, you know, closing the door on the leg. It was not, and it was not a direct engagement with my whatever that was. It was something that was much more about. It was actually much more direct than what I was at that time, and you know, I've always remembered that moment because it was so stark. It was so different from what we usually are up to, you know.
You know, I wonder to myself, that's a nice point. You still here?
I'm here.
I wonder to myself, I've oftentimes thought that like fanboy or fangirl doesn't get us all the way. Like the nature of that kind of thinking, like you can look at, like I admire Gary Tonin. I admire Gordon. And, you know, in those days, I looked up to some of the black belts that were, you know, moving around, Ricardo and Matt and, you know, and John, you know, I still look up to John, but for other reasons, really. But the kind of fan worship that like I think we can get into doesn't give us access to our own sense of worth in the practice. And you know, it's a really lovely gift that you glean. Like it's a lovely lesson, because I think had you been, you know, left to your own fanboy devices, it might not have gone this way for you.
Yeah, it was a teaching moment. Yeah. Because I was, what I was looking for, I think, in that moment was a very specific way of relating to him.
Yeah.
That
but
was,
also to
it was not relevant to this context that we were in. Yeah. You know, and it wasn't what I remember, you know, I remember kind of puzzling over that. I was like, oh, you know, do I dismiss this as just the rantings of a madman, or, you know, was it an insult to me? Was it just very dismissive? You know, what was it? And I don't know really what it was. I mean, maybe it was just, you know, that was just what was on his mind, and that's what he said. But, you know, what it really meant for me was, yeah, exactly. It's in retrospect, I didn't actually need what I was asking for. I needed something else. I needed to kind of get retracked a little bit, you know? And that was a moment where I said to myself, you know what? I don't know what I was doing, but this is kind of now the way I'm going. And it wasn't arrogant, and it wasn't frustrating. It was just, I had no place to put it, you know?
I wonder how many times you've used that on others in the locker room.
I wish I could. I wish I had
Not
that.
like, you know what I like? Like, but maybe you say, you know what I like? I like tacos.
But it's not. It couldn't even.
You can't do it?
Yeah, I couldn't even do it. I would have to be. It was so weird and so out of place. You know, there's that Zen story about, you know, the master takes his shoe off. You know, someone says, you know, the student says, like, what is enlightenment? And he takes his, like, slipper off and just smacks the guy in the face with it. You know, it was almost like that. It was really something else.
What's the sound of Elvis's hand clapping, one hand clapping?
Yeah, what's the sound of one finger dropping? You know, that, yeah, neither.
You know, Brian, Danaher and I were just talking about it. We were reminiscing kind of about the old days and how there, like, used to be, you know, when I started, there were only 2 purple belts on this side of the country. And, and then, you know, what that was like. And, you know, he had said to me that one day he pulled you aside and was like, what are you doing here? Like, this is not for you. Like, this is for guys like Gene Dunn, like guys that are, like, you know, missing teeth. And, you know, you're a nice, intelligent person. Like, but more, I'll say it. I don't think that, you know, allow me to say it, but, you know, I was there. I remember that, you know, John took you under his wing, you and one other, and you were the first of this, you know, what I think is ridiculous, DDS, like the name, the moniker. I think they should change it. I think it does not represent the level of intellect and practice and I mean, all the things that go into being a part of that core group. So I'll say it, and I'll tell anybody that I think it's ridiculous, including John. I've said it to him, but you know, you were the first generation, and I remember one is when you went to college, Danaher was an adjunct professor at Columbia, and you had, like, walked into his class and then walked out, right? It was not a kind of interesting thing for you, but, like, what was it like for you to be almost like the springboard for modern day jiu-jitsu? Like, what is that like for you? What were you thinking then about it, and what does it mean to you now?
At the time, we weren't really thinking in those terms. We were not thinking so broadly. You know, we were very much research and development. You know, we were the R&D arm of what was going on. And that was a rewarding place to be just by virtue of being in it. And I think that if we had aspirations that were too great, they would have pulled out, you know, they would have detracted from some of what was going on. That was very much, you know, laboratory work, you know, like bench science work. And it was a very fertile, and, you know, it was a very fertile period, but it is still, you know, very fertile in the sense that the earth is being turned over all the time, you know, and in order for a farmer to be able to plant, the earth has to be turned over for the seeds to be planted. And there was
Nourished.
there was a lot of turning over of the earth, and there were a lot of seeds going in. And some of the seeds brought forth great things. Some of them didn't, As you know, the saying, the birds take some of them land on the rocks. Some of them grow, almost to their fullest potential and they're plucked away. And some of them end up becoming, the full crop. And so there was a feeling of that, I think, but it was also in the same way that I think a farmer is participating in a very natural cycle. I mean, it's just in some ways, it's a very exalted thing because it requires this collaboration of all of the elements in order for it to really work out properly. And nobody has full control over those elements. So the farmer is both on, doing what he's doing and then also engaging in this much larger ecosystem. But by the same token, it's very simple work. It's very humble work. It's going out into the field and it's using the hoe and it's using the spade and it's using the shovel and the rake and all of these very basic fundamental instruments to do something that, sometimes it produces a really nice crop. And so that back then and then even now, that's the experience. The experience is that you're participating in an effort that's very grand, that's connected to a much larger thing, but the work itself, it's very basic.
It's chop wood, carry water.
It's the same thing. It's very, very basic, fundamental stuff. You get in and you do it, and your immediate results, maybe it's going to work, maybe it's not, or you can't pin your hopes on too many things. It's not really a work of hoping, it's a work of doing. And if you can keep that in mind, that's not to say don't have any expectations, but if you can kind of keep your expectations to a minimum, in the sense that what you're committed to is the work, not the results of the work, then there's space for longevity. And Danaher may not agree with this. That's one of my models of thinking around this, because it's the same for every student of the martial arts. You're going to come in, you're going to do the class, you have to do the work. There's no way around it. The farmer can't get from the seed to the crop without going out and physically turning the soil over and planting and waiting and doing all the things that they need to do. There's no quick stepping. You can't just, writing down what you're supposed to do is not the same as doing it. Thinking about what you're supposed to do is not the same as doing it. And then doing something without thinking about where you're going, also not the same. So you need the marriage of those two practices. And I think even though we're not farmers anymore, and probably nobody who's listening to this is a farmer, or was a farmer, or had a parent who was a farmer, we still understand something very fundamental about what it means to engage in a very simple practice that sometimes leads to a rather extraordinary outcome. And so early on, it was like that. In the middle, it was like that. Presently, it's like that. After we get through with all of this stuff and everyone's back to training and everyone's back into the rhythm, it's going to be more of the same thing. So you have to really engage with the process and enjoy it and see yourself as, being integral to the result through the work that happens daily.
That was a beautiful answer, by the way. Thank you. It was really, I think, it illustrates a lot. So thank you for that. Well thought out. I have a couple of questions about how you see things. One is, if you could give a beginner or intermediate person,
I'm listening.
like some of your, like, one thought model other than don't hero worship and, you know, chop wood, carry water, what would it be like in terms of like your unique perspective? Like, how do you look at learning, or how do you look at, I know that Sean was a real innovator, is still a very innovative thinker. But like, how do you think about martial arts or jiu-jitsu that could give someone like a springboard, if you will?
Like a new person, you mean, or someone who is already training?
You know, somewhere in the beginner, mid-range, you know, intermediate level, or maybe even advanced. Maybe someone who's feels like, I don't know what, they're plateauing, or, you know, this thing has run its course. Maybe that's a good one, because, you know, I think I said this to you, like, Danaher referred to you as the modern day Mifune. He, you know, you're the senior student that is practicing and showing what the young generation can look forward to if they do it well. So maybe, you know, what is there something there? Is there a unique sort of idea that you hold close that is keeping you healthy, keeping you working, keeping you at kind of like this position in the hierarchy? Is there something there that?
No, I would say that our expectations for ourselves and the way things are supposed to look, they often get in the way of the way things actually look. And when that happens, as people who are practicing, we get very frustrated. You know, we can find ourselves feeling like there's something that's not matching up. And then what we do when we feel like something's not matching up is not usually the most effective or efficient or proactive approach.
You don't.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I fall into
So
that
if
all the
you're,
time.
well, so I think that's something that people need to keep in mind and be very vigilant about. And you have to have a sense of discipline about this, that you cultivate regularly as it shows up, which is that your working and planning is one thing. You know, not having expectations doesn't mean that you don't have a plan. You know, not having expectations means that you are still open and flexible to what shows up in real time for you. And you're willing to make, or you're able to make, the sorts of adjustments and changes that you need to make in order to continue on. So when we have set expectations, we then have a very rigid definition of how we're going to move from point A to point B and then beyond.
Right.
So if you can loosen some of your expectations for how things are supposed to look, how you're supposed to look, how the training is supposed to look, how the class is supposed to look, and instead focus again on the work that you're doing in the moment, the effort that you're putting forth, the place you're headed to, but you're still kind of flexible about how you get there. If you can do that, then it doesn't mean that you're not going to run into problems, or you're not going to feel frustrated, or you're not going to see things show up that you didn't expect, or have the thing that you least wanted to have happen to you, whether it's an injury or some other setback or not getting the partner that you wanted, or not getting the promotion that you wanted, or the technique doesn't make sense, or you feel like you're on the outside, or you feel like you're getting too much attention, or you're not getting enough attention, whatever it is. If you don't have as many expectations about how things are supposed to look, you'll find yourself a little bit more flexible, and you can deal with the crest and the troughs of the wave a little bit more, So I think that's something that people can use day to day by just recentering. You have to have, again, a measure of vigilance and discipline to recognize how you're thinking. If you're finding yourself diving down into a rabbit hole about how, I'm not good enough, or this isn't working out, or I can't do this, or this person beat me, or, I used to beat this person up and now they're beating me up, or however it looks. Because then you get very rigid about what the next thing is supposed to be. And when that thing frustrates you, it becomes it becomes compounded. Then you're worse off than you were before. So that's one thing that I like to try to keep in mind. I encourage other people and our students to do the same thing.
I think this is like the $10,000 question, and I have a feeling you just answered it, but with this COVID-19 thing, and I see a lot of people that I know through the martial arts and who are really either good black belts or really strong practitioners. They're not having an easy go of it right now. I think that they're understandably very nervous and very unsure, and it's getting them and getting to them. And I've been kind of saying to my friends and a lot of people that I know that this moment is what we've all been training for. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to make sense. But what lessons are you drawing from your own martial art practice to deal with and combat this very real, seemingly real, aggressive opponent? How are you looking at this thing, this moment in your life, your family's life, or our schools? What are you doing? What can be helpful?
Well, a couple of things.
Thanks. It's a big question, man, and thank you I see you're considering it.
Well, a few things. One of them is that people are now, you're hearing this a lot, this is not unique to what we do, but people are being encouraged to maintain some measure of routine and regularity, because we're in a period of a lot of uncertainty and a lot of change, whether it's because your regular routine as a jiu-jitsu practitioner is changed up, dojo is closed, your workplace is closed, you're working from home, you're quarantined, you're isolated. All of these changes is a call to reinforce whatever sort of habits or routines you can put in place and keep in place, but maintaining, what we would call like a flexible rigidity. Because again, back to what I was saying before, if you're too rigid, you'll find yourself breaking against the wind. If you're too flexible, you'll get knocked over. This is, again, a balance, an issue of balance. So our recommendation, my thinking around this is, there are a few things that I can do now that are part of my regular routine. I'm going to maintain those. Whether for you, that may have to do with a period. So you can't do your hour of jujitsu, 2 hours of jujitsu. Can you do something that is related to that, that still keeps you partially physically engaged? Because jujitsu is challenging. It's one of the best, and now we're seeing one of the hardest things is it does require another person. You can get a grappling dummy, but it ain't the same thing. Whereas if you're, if you got a heavy bag in your basement and you're a Muay Thai guy, you can come out okay. But with jujitsu, you do need another person, more or less. So being able to find some sort of physical routine to maintain, finding some sort of mental routine to maintain, whether that's reviewing your notes or thinking back over the classes that you've taken, or reviewing your instructor's online, distance learning, online education stuff. You can do something to keep a semblance of your routine in spite of it being changed. So that's one thing. And I think that's important, The other thing that I think about is, a little bit, it's a little incongruous, but I think you'll understand where I'm coming from with it. Actually, you'll understand probably better even than I understand it. But one thing that I don't know personally, but I do know from having been around people who have done this, is that if you're a very high level fighter, if you are heading into a fight for the UFC, the preparation, the physical preparation, the training camp is not always the hardest part. It's often having to wait around for what the next thing is that you're going to do. And you hear about fighters getting very nervous in the back room between, the 5th hour before the fight. Then it's the 4th hour. Then it's the 3rd hour, or it's the night before. And there's all of these very quotidian preparations that have to take place. You have to check into your hotel, and you have to wait around for the press conference. And then you've got to wait around for something else. And those periods of waiting are just excruciating, because you want to go and do the thing that you came to do, but there are all of these barricades. And so part of what I understand is part of the experience of a very, an uber professional person, is your ability to manage both the uptime and the downtime very well. So I see this period of time as being that sort of thing for the rest of us. We're going through a period where, the big moment, it might be, a month or 2 or 3 away. But the real mettle of a practitioner is tested not in the moment that they're going into the classroom. It's having to wait, having to adjust, having to find the patience and the self-discipline not to fall apart in the downtime. Because the uptime is what we do. We do that all the time. But when we're faced with some downtime, we're like, everybody is freaking out, So I see this as, part of the work, actually, part that many people prior to now have not had to deal with.
What are you saying to yourself? What is Brian Glick saying to himself during the downtime to manage?
Well, this is just part of it. This is just part of it. Again, there are no real interruptions on the path. In the training, and I don't think I don't think that is a martial arts specific thing. But there are no interruptions on the path. So your injuries, your disappointments, your frustrations, your downtime, all of that stuff,
or your vacations and your celebrations and your honeymoons and your kids' graduation.
Yeah, there's nothing outside of the path for the person who is really doing this, And what I think we do a lot of times is we will see the things that we like, that we can control as being like, oh, that's part of it. You know, that's part of it. Class is part of it. Your uniform is part of it. You know, your successes are part of it. Your frustrations are part of it. And then there's like this whole other class of stuff that we see as being outside or unrelated to it. And really, when it is your whole thing, you know, when the training is your whole deal, it's inside, it's outside, it's on the mat, it's off the mat. It is, and that's the lesson from, you know, the people who are really doing this, the people who have, you know, the masters from way back when, the people presently now who are operating at a very high level, that there's not an interruption. It's not that there's some stuff that's outside of your practice as a martial artist, and then there's some stuff that's inside. Because then it's just like, you know, you're only doing jiu-jitsu while you're physically doing it. And yeah, like you're only doing the physical technique while you're physically doing it. But as we know now, and one of the pros about this period of time is you're seeing more people acknowledging that we have to, as jiu-jitsu people, as martial arts practitioners, we have to bring this other stuff to bear, you know? That's why
we've been saying for years, like, you know, and not just as a line to recruit new students, but no, everyone, like the practice is everything. Your jiu-jitsu is in everything. Your martial art practice, your karate practice, your kickboxing practice, your kung fu practice. It is everything. It is everything. That's a beautiful thing.
And that's on you as a practitioner. It's not, and that's not an external force that's pushing down on you. You know, that's an internal decision that you make to view each of these things as part of the context of your training.
Out, not outside in, right?
Yeah. And so if you can keep that in mind, you don't have to like where you are, you know? I just think that there's plenty of times where we don't like where we are, you know? And, you know, that's just it. And so, you know, kind of what do I tell myself in periods like this? I tell myself, like, this is not the first time I've had to do something that I don't want to do. It's not the first time I'm in a position that I don't want to be in. That's every single day. It's every single day for me. Yeah, every day. And so the choice is, you know, do you complain about it as being outside of your experience, or do you just acknowledge it as being a part of the fabric of what's already going on? Can you imagine if if you were training with someone and like whenever you were on the bottom of the mountain, you were like, this is not really the training. Like someone's on your back, you're like, this is not really the training. It's only when I'm on your back that we're really training. It's only when I'm in the mount that we're really training. But when my arm is totally extended, it doesn't really count. Well, if you take it to that conclusion, it just doesn't make any sense. You know, no one would agree with that. So I think it's not even a leap of logic. It's just a small, it's a small step to say, look, this is just another thing. Now, we are hoping and we're working for it to be, you know, we don't want it to be 3 months. You know, maybe I'll feel differently if it's, you know, I don't want to spend 3 months in the bottom of the mount either. But maybe I'll feel differently. But right now, this is it.
I'll take 2 months bottom of the mount and 1 month in half guard.
Right. That sounds good. Yeah.
I'll gladly trade you 2 hamburgers on Tuesday for a hamburger today. Yeah.
But we don't, you know, we don't get that. We don't get to pick it. We just have to, you know, and there will be people for whom this is too much.
My heart goes out to them. It's just, you know, a lot of us, this is another class at the dojo. Yeah. This is another positional training exercise. This is another day in which, you know, you got up, You went to train, you did your best, you went home, you washed your gi, you ate, you did your kids' homework, and you went to bed. And it's going to be the same tomorrow for a little bit.
Yeah.
It's just, and what are you gleaning? What are we gleaning? How are we thinking about this? How are we just kind of reacting, or can we respond a little bit better? Can we cultivate more? Can we refine more? Can I be a little bit gentler, or, you know, have some longevity in mind? This is not outside of all of our wheelhouse. In fact,
Right.
This is right inside the wheelhouse. Beautiful.
Yeah, there's no outside. There's nothing outside of it.
There is no darn mountaintop. There's just the path. That's really good. It's really good. Well, thank you, Brian. I adore you, man. I'm your biggest fan, and just so many insightful ideas, and I know that you're inspiring a lot of people, not just with your jiu-jitsu, but who you are as a person. I'm one of them, and you bring a sense of calm and a sense of certainty to the schools, the students, and I think in this moment to the world at large. So I'm grateful for you, man, and I love you dearly.
Thank you. The feeling is mutual.
Yeah. All right, brother.
All right.
We'll talk soon. Love you. Nice job.
Thank you. Same. Thank you.